Hi everyone, my name is Joanne McCafferty and I am an Antiquities Trafficking student at the University of Glasgow under the Master of Science postgraduate programme titled Collecting and Provenance Studies in an International Context. And today I'm going to be talking about or addressing the famous question of should the Parthenon marbles be repatriated to Athens? John Henry Merriman, one of the most prolific commentators on the Parthenon marbles, provides us with two ways of thinking about cultural property. One as components of a common human culture, whatever their places of origin or present location, independent of property rights or national jurisdiction, and two, as part of a national cultural heritage which could be controlled by national export laws. In this hangout on the potential repatriation of the Parthenon marbles from the British Museum to Athens, I aim to briefly address the perspectives of John Merriman and Neil MacGregor, with my primary criticism of such viewpoints influenced by the writings of Colin Renfrew on the significance of the preservation of context in archaeological discovery and the continual scholarly address of cultural heritage sites around the world. It is evident that this case has simply gone beyond legalities, and it has particularly more recently become a debate of morality and good and bad ethics, a grey area. To many Greeks, the Parthenon marbles are viewed as an issue of national pride. This notion of cultural retentionism, rooted in nationalism, is, however, consistently undermined by the concept of a common cultural heritage, a cultural heritage without the confinement of modern borders. In his 1985 article, Thinking About the Elgin Marbles, Merriman concludes that the Greeks do not have a legal claim to the marbles and that moral arguments fail to justify the return of the marbles to Greece. He categorically rejects cultural nationalism, suggesting that such nationalist pleas on behalf of source countries fosters excessive sentimentality and emotional value being attached to a case, as has occurred with the Parthenon marbles. A perspective which is focused on by Merriman when discussing the repercussions of repatriation is a consequent avalanche of restitution claims from source countries to the majorly Western museums housing vast collections, leaving their holdings drastically depleted. I do not count myself for cultural retentionism rooted in nationalism and do support the free movement of cultural objects. However, the same ideas should not apply to what was initially immovable cultural heritage, integral structural components of a piece of ancient architecture specific to that particular location in the world. Of immovable artifacts, internationalism should signify the global preservation of cultural heritage in all countries, not the necessity for everyone in the world to have ease of access to said heritage through its separation from its original source and consequently the destruction of context. Neil MacGregor exhibits a very similar view to Merriman's. He believes the Parthenon marbles will bring maximum public benefit by staying in London rather than going to a new museum in Athens. And in Athens, they would be part of an exclusively Athenian story. This is problematic in the sense that context is commonly viewed as as the most important aspect of historical research and understanding. The marbles should not be understood as immovable cultural objects. They should, regardless of their current detachment, be viewed as immovable cultural heritage, part of the architecture of Athens. Moreover, the very notion of a common cultural heritage, which MacGregor is a great advocate of, should debunk his comment regarding the marbles becoming an exclusively Athenian story if repatriated. They would remain a significant part of our democratic history, but would have the capability of conveying a more coherent representation of that history. The notion of common cultural heritage, there does not need to persist the deconstruction of context and potentially the degradation of that cultural history. Merriman takes note that Elgin collected assorted architectural fragments from the Parthenon. Such fragments, he states, as the frieze were integral parts of the Parthenon structure, and in removing them, substantial portions of the adjoining masonry. However, the primary argument presented by Merriman is that those aspects which were not removed um, have deteriorated in the intervening 175 years, whilst Lord Elgin's booty in its current location in the British Museum has been perfectly preserved and therefore should not be repatriated. Nonetheless, although this initial relocation and subsequent housing in the British Museum has resulted in their survival and maintenance, now that there exists a suitable museum at the foot of the Acropolis in which the marbles may be housed, the argument for context persists and intensifies. In order to allow for greater scholarly understanding of this heritage site, the marbles should be placed in the site or the museum. The argument of preservation is very retrospective, as I'm sure that translated into today's standards for the protection of cultural heritage sites, we would look at Elgin's order for the deconstruction of the Parthenon for his own personal gain as unthinkable. Regardless of how well they are now preserved, he contributed to their initial deconstruction, as well as the destruction of context, which we will never truly replicate. Contrary to McGregor, who states that the marble stopped being architectural details in the Parthenon and became sculptures in their own right, failing to recognise the importance of context with respect to immovable cultural heritage, Merriman acknowledges the view of the archaeologist. He states, archaeologists argue that the clandestine excavation and removal of objects from sites destroys context and causes the loss of irreplaceable information. With, according to Renfrew, nearly every nation in the world now with its own legislation to regulate the treatment of its ancient sites and monuments, and with, in most cases, to forbid the export without official permit of major antiquities originating within its borders, I believe that this almost internationally accepted standard for the protection of heritage sites to be applied retrospectively and call for the repatriation and restoration of the marbles to the Parthenon. To conclude, Renfrew recognises that dealers, collectors, and even some museum curators are often reluctant to acknowledge the crucial role of context in our evaluation and understanding of the past. A great work of art, they argue, has value in its own right, and the context is a secondary issue. With the current existence of a purpose-built Acropolis museum for the housing of the marbles, there is little excuse for the artefacts remaining in the British Museum and Germany, etc., as they would be maintained and preserved. Moreover, they would be reunited for a multitude of aesthetic, ethical, archaeological, and scholarly reasons. Thank you very much for your time.